Welcome to Veronica Live, and we are here with a Veronica Live family member, former Congressman Geoff Davis, and he's a managing partner for Republic Consulting, is back to join us and talk politics, and we were talking off air because he's writing this inspirational book, and I've been blessed to read a lot of the chapters, and I'm so moved, and I can't wait till it's a full-on book, and then I'm going to be your agent to push it out to the world, Congressman.
I appreciate that.
Well, we have a lot to talk about. I keep asking all of our guests the last few days. You know, unfortunately, I took one for the team and watched all 4 nights of the Democrat National Convention, and I wanted to see, were you watching the speeches as I, had to endure all of that pain?
Well, we divided that responsibility up among some friends, so we wouldn't have to do it all at once. But I would like to say though, the one thing that it exhibited, and frankly the RNC convention exhibited this too until the last night, was a very high degree of message discipline.
Okay.
And so
I agree with that.
There's an old saying, in politics, it applies to a variety of disciplines, but it's if your enemy is committing suicide, don't help him. And right now, because it's like rescuing a drowning person. You get pulled into that fray too, and the deeper lesson is the Democrats are ignoring Trump, which is driving him. It's agitating him, obviously, by the very strange things he's been saying this week, and he's not on a disciplined message, and they're essentially practicing what President Obama did in 2008 and what President Biden did in 2020 is, well, Biden had, the basement campaign, but minimize policy statements and allow people to be enraged by things that that their opponent was saying. And, in Obama's case, I remember that because I was living that hour by hour through that entire campaign. But the one thing that Obama was able to do was just provide hope and change. And the public opinion was so negative on the Bush administration, particularly with the financial crisis, perceptions of the war, for good or ill, it was where it was. And even though it had turned at that point, it created a circumstance where they had quite a bit of electoral pull. So I think the real challenge is going to be, all the polling that I've seen on the inside, that I've heard from the campaign committees, friends on the Hill, generic Republican, this is Republican year, runs away with the race. And in fact, when Biden was on the ticket, we were looking at very substantial pickups. But we see that the narrative has been flipped onto Mr. Trump now, and it's a whole nother ballgame. So we have a nail biter of a race that
oh my gosh,
could go either way. He's in trouble in several critical states right now, and it's, I don't know if you saw the interview he did with Dr. Phil the other day, but the inability to acknowledge that you're stronger in some places than others, or weaker in some places than others, and is problematic. And I think, honestly, the target demographic in this race is largely going to be suburban independents writ large, and suburban women who would normally be drawn to vote Republican. And they're not coming home in the data that we're seeing.
So do you think the economic situation, people go to the grocery store every day and they see these prices and they are like, people are flipping out, saying, $10 for a pound of bacon, $8 for a box of cereal. I mean, these prices are insane.
All doubled.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Inflation is terrible. It's a direct result of the failed policies of the Biden administration. And frankly, Joe Biden didn't govern the way he promised to. But again, it's not a normal electoral year. I can give you, maybe there's a parable from the past that illustrates this. So and I think it's very relevant to this. thinking of the documents that you're in the process of reading right now, which I guess when you get to the second one, you'll begin to see it. But in 2003, through kind of a war behind the scenes, my Democrat opponent opted to get out, and we had an open seat then, and my opponent was George Clooney, the actor's father, who was a well-known newscaster and columnist for 40 years in the Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky area, had 99% name recognition. Everybody knew him, and everybody had a positive impression. Sounded like another celebrity candidate that might have been president from 2016 to 2020. And I started out far, far behind in that. And as we got name ID and began to climb, the race began to tighten up. And we finally pulled ahead in the second week of October. But the only problem was that we had told everybody while we could still talk before the blackout that all of our data showed that you could not attack him personally and be mean to him. And so naturally, the National Republican Congressional Committee started calling him names. And I went from a comfortable lead to about 9 points down in the space of a week. Women hated me, and I even had an elderly woman hit me with a purse in a Panera restaurant. So
okay, I haven't read that yet, and what you sent me.
It was like Ruth Buzzy on the old that Rowan and Martin Lapin show from the '60s when we were all kids. But take that for a moment, and I want to tell you what happened. We had a response ad that was very powerful. That a wife of one of my former employee team members did that was running. But the turning point, we felt very quickly in that campaign, and I tested him a couple of times in some forums that weren't technically really debates, and I saw him having an extremely thin skin, be very prickly, and not be able to focus on issues. He would talk about other things, and there was always this underlying anger. And my campaign manager and I had determined, it's like being in the boxing ring. My campaign manager and I talked about it, and we thought he's going to get tired at the end, and if we can keep the pressure up and throw out some things that might distract him. And this was nothing mean. It was nothing personal. It was very issue focused, but let him react to that. And he had a meltdown on tri-state television during prime time on the largest DMA broadcast TV station in Cincinnati. And I won and this is 5 days before the election, and we were dead even, and I won by 10 points.
Oh my God.
And so the reason I mention this is not to talk about me, but is to say, if she is shrewd and she's a former, and look at what Trump has done. She's talking about touchy-feely things, and he's calling her names. She's ugly. She's stupid. I hate her. I would have won California. I won California, if Jesus had been or if God had been counting, or Jesus had been counting the ballots, I would have won California. He did that with Dr. Phil this week. I don't know if you've seen that.
I saw that clip.
This is the kind of, and the problem is the people who watch that show are the very voters who are going to decide this election in those urban suburban areas. And that's a problem. And so if she's shrewd, and they've telegraphed it already by wanting the open mics, Chris LaCivita and Susie Wild are trying to make sure the mics are turned off, like the Biden debate.
Yep.
And Harris is different. She's going to be ready. She'll be loaded for bear. She's actually practicing, unlike the president. I actually practiced, unlike Nick Clooney, for the debate. And I rewatched it in the process of doing that writing from 20 years ago, and it was stunning contrast. Not because he was better looking than me. I've been told I had a great face for radio, but we put him away in the debate. And at the end, the pressure mounted, and just out of nowhere, he lost his temper, didn't talk about issues, and I just stood there. And my wife was gesturing to me to just smile at the camera, which I did for the last 5 minutes.
I like your wife. I say that to candidates all the time.
I'm deadly serious.
You're happy to be there. Well, but I thought Biden did, or Trump did well with Biden. He was such a disaster in that debate. Trump kept it together and didn't do the name calling. I mean, they're saying that Tulsi Gabbard has been helping him.
But we don't know if it's an actual debate, because the last several he's done, I've talked to folks who participated around that, and it's not the kind of debate prep like we would do for 2, 3, 4 hour blocks where it's like 2-day workouts in sports. We're gaming, we're testing messages, we're practicing responses, not so that you're going to be a robot, but the idea that I've got the toolbox in my upfront memory so I can be fast on my feet and take advantage of opportunities.
And that's what you do. It's that murder board that you do with generals. I've done it now multiple times with candidates because it has to be there. Well, I hope he's practicing because I felt like during the DNC, their only messaging to me was orange bad man, orange bad is bad, and then the baby killing every single speech, and then the third point that came out numerous times was that Republicans are after their books, and I've seen these books and they're horrific. So
absolutely, you're right on every point. But this is again the voters. When you got an election that's this close margin wise, this is not Ronald Reagan versus Fritz Mondale in '84. And you look at the community, as much as people want to make fun of Reagan and the MAGA movement, he brought a coalition together, not to mention that had actual substantive long-term policy impacts in virtually every issue area in the country. But what he was able to do was put messages and facts behind a vision. I remember right before I enlisted in the Army in 1976, when he was still running for president, he gave a 30-minute infomercial on prime time explaining the triad and the importance of deterrent against the Soviet Union, and we need to stand up against them. And that fired me up to no end. And what I would tell you to do with the debate that Trump had with Biden is not watch it, but pull down a copy of the transcript and read the syntax of what he said. I'm not saying this to be a mean guy, but who's going to decide this election? That 1% or 0.5% in the 9 battleground states that will decide this are not going to be making a reasoned decision based on subjective policies critical of this administration.
Well, I think the subjective policies, the groceries, as John said, because it's out of control right now, and the little guy who doesn't have a retirement or money coming in, they're barely making it.
And it's sort of
I agree.
And if you remember Bill Clinton, or James Carville, when back when Clinton was running, what was his famous words? It's the economy, stupid. That's what the Bush people weren't doing, or McCain, was it Bush? Yeah, I can't remember. But anyway, it was the economy. It was the economic issues, the tabletop issues that the people were after, and not so much, are they blaming the policy? I mean, can you walk away and say, I had nothing to do with this policy and claim you're going to fix it?
Well, I think the question is that you get so much time. It's like, how many missiles you be carrying on the pylons under your aircraft, or, how many rounds of ammunition that we have when we go into the fight. That's time. The time that you get in front of the electorate is key. And so as they're fishing for messages, and this is the thing that's frustrating to me. And I know a lot of folks on Capitol Hill who vigorously defend Donald Trump in the media, who are good friends of mine, and they are exasperated behind the scenes uniformly because he's not talking about these things. So you get half an hour with Dr. Phil when you have a national audience. It's going to be a viral interview no matter what you say. And you talk about the fact that you won California emphatically for 12 minutes, and that had God been counting the votes, or Jesus come down and counted the votes instead of the election, and the things that he was sharing, there were a few tidbits of semi-accurate information in that, but that's 12 minutes that he could be talking about. Joe Biden promised that he would govern as a moderate, that he would govern with the economy, and look what he's done. He's caused inflation. He's limited our energy exports. He's created great geopolitical risk for the United States. We did not have that in my 4-year term, and we will deal with that with a united government. That's the message. And saying or getting emotive and picking on people is just not the way to work that. And that's frankly that's why you see such a big difference in data. If you put generic Republican next to Kamala Harris, she's defeated decisively. But when it's her versus Trump, coming back to that low information, low propensity voter who will decide this election, and that's who's going to decide it, they're going to make it. They're going to make a decision based on an emotional perception. And I will say that the abortion issue is going to have some degree of effect. It's not going to be the overwhelming effect. I still, to your point, think the economy will be very high. But people don't tend to vote for people they don't like. And the one thing that I learned in my nearly 32 years around the political game is, as a volunteer for the first decade and then a candidate or a member for the rest, and being active, is that the number one decider is this candidate cares about me more than the other candidate. And if you look at the tone of messaging and get outside of the optics, become very important. Again, if women is your most important demographic, especially suburban women, they tend to be a little more educated. They tend to, and this is nothing about education levels and all this weird stuff that the people that sit in faculty lounges talk about. I'm just speaking about where people are coming from when they go to vote. So if I'm doing my Republican National Convention and I want to make sure that I appeal to that critical demographic, I knew that Democrat women were going to be the ones who elected me in 2004, and I was the most conservative guy running on the ballot in Kentucky when I got elected, and was the most conservative member of the delegation the whole time I was there. But I got elected by Democrat women, and that's being able to create a sense of empathy, build a bridge of trust that we do care. And so when his signature campaign event before he spoke came out, think about who he had on there. He had Hulk Hogan, who has a rather erotic background.
Okay, but it was hysterical because I thoroughly enjoyed that, because even my husband's like, I'm not watching this, and I was like, you need to come in here for that. And so
no, I remember watching Hulk Hogan in 1982 when I was an Army lieutenant, and in real time. This is not that. But what I'm saying though is, if I've got to win somebody who's going to be offended by having by domestic abuse and by, I hate the term, but it's a real term, is miscegenation. The idea that all I have to do is appeal to blue collar men and I can win. That's a misunderstanding of the fundamental demographics that are driving elections.
When he was on with Elon Musk, I think it was 70 million people, and the target age was that young age group from 18 to whatever that don't vote, and they were all tuned in. And he was actually really good that night with issues and things. I didn't think he was crazy or anything.
Yeah, so we'll just, we're going to have to see. I think that the real deciding factor, and this is when you're going to see ballots start to harden, will be after the first debate. And I will, just bring back a memory from 2020, or actually, from 2020. The one thing I would say is he should stop talking about election fraud. He needs to stop talking about that. He's obsessed with it. He needs to, and I think the irony is he did lose in 2020. I've overseen hundreds of elections, and there were a few questionable things in a couple of states related to constitutional issues, but these weren't, in the sense it wasn't formal fraud. It had to do with pandemic-related ballot.
Well, do you think that's why? Why is Zuckerberg coming out with his little letter saying that he was part of it with the Hunter Biden suppression? And then, of course, I know this as a fact because I was a Trump chair in 2015-16, and I couldn't get some of my Trump stuff routinely. I couldn't post it on my Panhandle Loves Trump page. So why is he coming out now?
I have one of my colleagues that simply forwarded the New York Daily News article, and he was locked out of Twitter over it. I understand that, but here's the more, usually these changes in races, there are typically very mundane things that you can look at and see. And I'll give you an example of this. In the first debate in 2020 was when Donald Trump lost the election. He was on his way to winning before that. So the numbers were there. And he just crawled all over Joe Biden, was mean, was interrupting him, was bullying. That's kind of the man's style when he wants to act like an alpha. And that was the beginning of early voting. So before the second debate that happened, I think on October 23rd-ish, a few weeks later, 20 million people voted early across the country, and heavy voting in the battlegrounds, 20 million votes. After the second debate, which I was visiting with one of my daughters and her husband, and they wanted me to watch the debate with them. And I was like, after the first one, I don't think I need to. And they're like, please. So I sat and I watched it, and I marveled. It was a different guy came out. Trump was focused. He was measured. He wasn't rude. He didn't interrupt. He had answers. The very next day on Google, the number one search term in the United States was, how do I change my vote? That's when the election was lost. And that's where you got that 7 million, vote difference. And the thing that the Trump, if you want, he has, this is an easy race to win. All he's got to do is lean in, stick to the facts, be nice, say, hey, the assassination attempt was a perfect opportunity for this, was to say,
well, I think that changed people, and that's what I wanted to ask you about. Where were you, and what were you thinking? Because I know people that weren't even thinking about voting, and that night I went to an event, and it just occurred, and literally people, like, I could see the change that night. And I thought when he debated Biden, I mean, Biden sadly was such a disaster, but he was pretty calm and seemed focused that night. So
and that was another case of get out of the way while your enemy's shooting himself in the foot.
Yeah.
Don't interfere.
Yeah, just be quiet and let him tie himself in a knot. Again, what we're dealing with, you've got an angry electorate on both sides. You've got the center of the electorate. Basically, people are driven to their corners right now. You have some additional ancillary issues that are playing out there. The economy is certainly number one, but the Republican Party, and I've been a Republican for a long time, has squandered the attempt to capitalize on this message with the change that happened the week after the RNC convention. And I was in Washington a couple of times in late July, and the one thing that I was consistently hearing by some fairly prominent folks behind the scenes is that the president's not on message, and verbatim, we're going to lose this election and maybe lose the House if we don't get onto a coherent message of unity and invitation for people to come in and join the party. And if you look at Kamala, regardless of whether she's being truthful or not, that's irrelevant right now. She's got the pleasant invitation, the handout, we're a big tent, we want everybody to work together and build a future for tomorrow. I'm not hearing that message in my own party right now.
Okay. You're connected,
Congressman.
You're connected. John and I just have a podcast here that I get really smart people on, and so what do we do? Because that's one thing is I want you on X as well. I've landed on X the last few months. I'm almost at 5 million views on things I talk about, and I need you on X talking about this and who has Trump's ear to kick his ass to say he needs to stay on message? Because
and Susie Wiles she's not a dumb person, okay? She knows how to win.
No, she's not. They're very frustrated. They were very. Here's an inside piece of tidbit for you. I do not know Susie Wiles, but I got this from someone who knows her very well. They were absolutely unhappy at this choice of the vice presidential nominee. And who they wanted was somebody who would add value to the ticket. And JD doesn't give them that. JD was pushed by Peter Thiel and by the Trump boys.
I thought his son, too, Donald Trump Jr.
Yeah, Donald Jr. Yeah, the Trump boys.
I wasn't tracking JD either. And that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you because he wasn't who I thought it was going to be. And so I
think that you when you pick a running mate, you want, like I've known Tim Walz for 18 years. And I watched Tim Walz shapeshift towards the end of his time in Congress. And when he became, and it's very common with a lot of veteran candidates, we're all veterans, but we also have very strong worldviews among the three of us. We're very conservative, or there are veterans who are very liberal, but they know why they believe what they believe. And I think Tim fell into maybe less so than some others I've known, but I've known a number of younger Democrat veterans or veterans who want to run. And for example, my last opponent that I had who I'd actually helped with a Veterans Affairs case, ironically, went to the Republican Party in my home county where he lived and asked if they'd support him running for Congress because I was a squish or too liberal or too conservative, whatever it was that he said. And they're like, "Are you serious? Geoff Davis has got 90% primary approval rating. We're not going to help you. Run for something else or be a volunteer." And he turned around and went to the Democrats and became the nominee. And well, the rest is history. He doesn't live in Kentucky anymore, but after getting thrashed, but plus paying himself a bunch of money out of his campaign. But the point being that there are several members in Congress now who I'm not going to name, but who came in that way. They didn't have a strong worldview in particular. They wanted to serve. And most people during their time in the military aren't particularly political, just because the nature of our focus professionally on the task at hand, we rarely have time to think about anything else other than our work. I think that Tim kind of fell in that category, but the one thing though that Tim comes across as, and JD doesn't, and this is just another contrast with Kamala, who was not known as a nice person in the Senate by Democrat staffers that I know. We've heard the stories of the turnover in her office and the drama in her office and all of this. But what's her public persona right now? It's nice and it's welcoming. And as much as it makes me physically ill from that TV show, that talk show she was on with that sycophantic host that got on her knees and said, "We need a mamala," or whatever. The bigger reality, the bigger reality is she is playing that role to the hilt. And Tim Walz is playing that nice guy. And Tim Walz has not been Tim Walz is not recruited to bring rural male voters in, because anybody who owns a gun is not voting for Tim Walz. He couldn't win his own congressional district after being governor of Minnesota. But when I go back to who is going to decide this election in those 9 battleground states, really probably 5 now, it's going to be primarily suburban women and low intensity, low information voters who are going to make an emotive decision on their vote, and they're not going to look at policies. And
but there were no policies at that DNC thing. It was all hope and joy.
There weren't in 2008 either, and we lost 20 seats in the House.
Right.
Oh my
gosh. And I'll give you a good example, Jeff. Back in 2015, when I was still a member of the Republican Executive Committee in Florida, we went to one of our meetings, and they had a consultant that came in, and on his own he took Trump's speeches, some of the 90-minute speeches, and he distilled it down to a 75, 80-second commercial. And I tell you, they ran that commercial and played that, and you were like thinking, this guy is Ronald Reagan, Morning in America, born again. I mean, Trump has the essence in there, but you have to get all the fluff out of the way, to get to that essence.
I think you could, in that sense. But again, it comes back to, something that Mitch McConnell has preached for decades, and it's true, candidate quality matters. And I think that, I'm not saying this about me. I had a great team, but you have to be teachable. You have to have a degree of humility. You can't surround yourself with sycophants and yes men. It's like my 1st battalion commander told a captain, and I was sitting there as a lieutenant, and I listened to this in a staff meeting. He said, "I don't pay you to say yes." And that's the attitude I have with everybody that I work with. I want the truth. If you disagree with me, I know one person who's a shortlister for a very senior position in the Trump administration, and he told me personally, he just said, I want people who disagree with me. I want people who think differently than me, because we're going to run a better department if we do that. And you think about our experience in the military, we want that, like it says in Proverbs, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy may be profuse. And I would say this in humility before you, to your listeners, read, whether you like him or not, read H.R. McMaster's book, because that is the most accurate public snapshot that I know of what the inside of the Trump national security apparatus was like. It's objective.
Well,
he's already got death threats for it.
He's been making the circuit, but
right.
And he's a very conservative Republican, by the way.
But I've I've read some of those excerpts, and to some degree, I found a characterization a little strange because, he thinks that Trump is Trump. Okay, you have to give that to him, and I think where I get off the rails with these people is Trump's the president, and yes, they may give him whatever advice, and he may not follow. And I think you would agree with this based on what you just said. My job is I've been an engineering consultant for the military for years. Okay, I give my clients the best advice, best technical advice on what to do, and it's their decision to take it or not. If they say no, I'm not going to follow your advice, I say that's fine. You're the decision maker. I'll do whatever you say because you're the decision maker. And I don't take it personally when they say no. And in politics, in particularly at that level, you get so many people that are backstabbers. And we saw this in the first Trump administration. We had all these people writing books and stuff. And it's like they didn't get their way. So, they want to take their ball and go home, or they want to sabotage it or whatever. When the president says, this is my policy, your job is to either execute the policy or resign if you don't agree with it. And there are so many people that won't do that. They just seem backstab.
I think that we have to be careful on what we say is backstab. Certainly there was that, and many of the people who were doing it were among the most sycophantic in the organization. I mean, there were people that should never have been working in the White House, in
right.
the National Security Council. People like Sebastian Gorka, Kash Patel. My God, these people. Doug McGregor being put up for a position of under for policy. He is insane. He sat in my office, and he's on Newsmax and all these other shows. He sat in my office in the middle of a sentence and had a Tourette's moment, just lost it. We're talking about defense reform. I would bring anybody in to talk about defense reform, and I'm just listening to him, making a few notes. I read one of his books, and then he just loses it, and he says, "Oh, by the way, Dave Petraeus." This is at the height of the Iraq War. He said, "Dave Petraeus should never have been a 4-star general. I should have been the commander in Iraq." And I said, "I thought you left active duty. 7 years ago." And he goes, That's true, and I said, "Do you think the 2 books that you wrote that said that your entire chain of command was incompetent, that perhaps that had an influence on your not being promoted or getting on the command list?" No, that had nothing to do with it. It's just that he married a general's daughter. And that's one of a toolbox full of things for people who, I'll put you in the process. Again, we've all, at least, I'm sure at least a couple of us have made some very unpleasant decisions in our military service. And think about it in this context. You're Mark Milley and Mark Esper. And forget all the personification about General Milley or anything like that for a moment. I have my own issues, but we're going to get in this. But put yourself as Mark Esper. Social, conservative, Republican, former Secretary of the Army, Secretary of Defense, and the president looks at you with a straight face and wants you to bring in the 82nd Airborne to start shooting protesters outside the White House. What are you going to do?
No, I don't want that.
And,
That's
but I'm saying, but this is the counter to it's the president gave the order, and the point is that Mark stayed, and Milley actually had written his letter of resignation and was going to drop it when another former 4-star reached out and was like, "Hey, this is an unusual moment." I know John Kelly. I have worked with John Kelly. One of my closest friends from the Army served with him 3 different times in joint assignments, and said he's the finest military leader ever worked with. And my buddy retired as a 3-star himself, but I've watched John Kelly up close and personal. I first met him almost 20 years ago, and I had great respect for him. And you look at his perspective, and I think here's the other thing that when we ask these questions, and this is not to be anti anything, this is let's look at the facts. And we don't want to. We want to treat the root cause, not the presenting symptom. But when you have so many people who, in fact, were in critical positions and were highly respected, professionally competent people before, and they won't help the nominee, that probably tells you a little bit more of what was going on behind the scenes.
But what are we going to do? Because he was not my pick. I wanted DeSantis. and I see Kamala, and she's a nightmare on wheels. And then tell me about you said you've known Tim Walz for 18 years. You've been around him. I'm scared to death of him, and you're you were an officer in the Army.
I watched he and Patrick Murphy the first night, the first week that they were in Congress, or actually the second week, because it was the second week after swearing in. He and Patrick Murphy did a 1 hour special order where they were absolutely hosing on the United States military. It got so bad that friends in the 82nd Airborne Division were calling me and wanted to know who the hell those idiots are on the floor. And I actually helped Murphy's battalion commander get elected in 2010 as we beat Patrick Murphy finally. And then, he came back. He was appointed by the Obama administration to, go in the Department of Army in the second term. But, the point was that neither of them have extensive, legislative victories that were, sourced. But I guess the deeper, point is, yeah, you're right. All that is a problem. And, but at the same time, if you are perceived as being a really nasty person, and that person who's going to take that vote is going to make their vote based on who do I feel likes me or I'd like to have a beer with, that person who's been unkind generally loses out in elections. And I've seen that happen time after time after time. I would tell you, if Ron DeSantis were the nominee, if Nikki Haley were the nominee, this race would be over and we'd be looking at 54 to 55 Senate seats and a real working majority in the House.
All right, so back to Tim Walz, though, because you've seen him up close. I'm mortified that somebody that didn't have the rank put it on his congressional coin, this stolen valor we keep hearing about, and then he had a DUI and he was still able to make a senior enlisted rank. And you've seen him up close. Tell people about this man. I just feel like it's lie after lie with this man. And then as a military officer, I'm like mortified. Who lies about your rank ever?
In the 30 years ago, there was a person elected in Arizona to the Congress who claimed to have been, if I remember this correctly, claimed to have been a Korean War veteran or served in Vietnam. Memory's a little hazy. He got outed after he got to D.C. I know a couple of Republican members that I'm not going to mention their names on here because they will be famous in due time, who have pretty actually sketchy backgrounds compared to their actual military service. And I think that the challenge, that we have is that the three of us all understand we're part of the real 1% of the people who served in the military. Or are serving. And we've got this tiny percentage now of actual veteran service members, who are citizens living out in their communities now. So it's less of an issue. Everything is about impressions and influencers, and it's not about integrity and honor and the warrior ethos in our society anymore, and writ large. So, and I can be my authentic self. With all this crap was heating up, I told a sergeant major for a Joint Special Operations Command Tier 1 unit that I saw a few months ago. I told him, I said, hey, I just want to let you know, I identify as a sergeant major in your unit now. And everybody else was laughing but him. He didn't get the joke because he was very old school. And in this case here, it's going to be coming down to feelings. I've seen people that misrepresented their rank. And then on the flip side, somebody like J.D. Vance, as an example, has to be very careful about allowing people to get the impression that he was a door kicker, and he wasn't. He served honorably, and I respect that. But don't allow people to misperceive that. I won one of the things that came out of the 2006 race I had. My opponent, God bless these people where they come up with this. Some rocket scientist said, "Oh, he's not a real Army Ranger," and they were getting ready to run with that. Well, I had his actual flight records from the Air Force, and I got a message to his campaign. You do what I think you're going to do, and every voter is going to know that you're a fake fighter pilot. And I've chosen not to talk about your military service. And he pulled his punch, and he didn't follow through with it. But it got so crazy at one point, I got a call from the president of the Army Ranger Association and said, "Hey, Jeff, are you in some kind of legal trouble or something?" And I said, no, not at all, man. But I am running for Congress. And the guy goes, oh, damn Democrats, and just takes off from there. And he said, I'll take care of this. And the point was not that everybody in the military leans one way or the other. We tend to lean more conservative because we have to live in, let's say, more real world, in the world of reality. But if you think about what's going on in our party right now, there's a disconnection from many of the things that of the coalition that's been around for a long time, for nearly 50 years, that was really driving the direction of the party, focusing on real fiscal responsibility, focusing on truth and reality versus ephemeral feelings or faculty lounge kind of ideas.
Well, I hate that we're talking about feelings, because this to me is the DEI crap that we've been enduring for the last couple of years. But my feelings are, I don't want this Walz one heartbeat away from the presidency. And I'm petrified by the guy, I think more than Kamala. I mean, she's oh my goodness. And you've seen him in action now.
All that has to happen for Republicans to sweep this election, and it may be too late now, but we've squandered nearly 2 months. All that has to happen is President Trump needs to show some humility, some kindness to the electorate at his rallies. People are looking for, the thing that sounds really great in the bar. Yeah, you smack them down. You tell them, you trash talk them. You know what? That might be really great at a pep rally or a bar, but that turns off the very people that you need in politics.
So
I had a person come up to me.
That? Wait, Congressman, didn't he show that with the anniversary of Abbey-gate? The families invited him. He went to Arlington, and then, Biden's on the beach. I don't even know where Kamala was. Maybe she was debate prepping, but I feel, sometimes in war, it doesn't always go our way, but these people have been hiding from the outcome of Afghanistan. So does he get no credit for that?
Well, no, he won't. And here's why. One, he stood over a fallen service member with his thumbs up smiling. That was exactly the wrong optic to have in that picture. I'm just going to say that straight up. A whole lot of my network lit up when I have all different political stripes, mostly conservative, when we saw that. I respect him for going, but his motive for going was basically the same motive that Kamala had for not going. And it's manipulative at its root, but Harris doesn't have to talk about Afghanistan. Harris doesn't have to talk about inflation. Harris doesn't have to talk about immigration, because Trump has spent a month talking about what? Her looks, her lack of intellect, about how she's a total loser and horrible, talking about this and that. And Donald Trump, of all people, doesn't need to talk about stolen valor with Tim Walz, because his daddy paid a doctor to write him a medical waiver so he wouldn't have to be drafted or serve in the military. And, there's different people have seen different sides of him in terms of interacting with service members. And I don't want to veer off into that, but essentially, go back to what I said at the beginning. If your opponent is committing suicide, don't help them. She doesn't have to talk about anything to counter his message, because he is filling his airtime with anger and condemnation, and it may fire up his base, but it's not accomplishing anything for a party agenda.
Well, we've got to win it. So who has his cell number? Because I need to call him. Because, you said, when I worked for generals, I told him the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we've got to get this Shiza back in order, because I can't imagine 4 more years of Cheerios at $8 to buy a damn box of Cheerios and $10 for bacon.
But I think the Republicans are trying to do that. And again, back to the Susie Wiles strategy there. They tried to do that about a week ago. They had a daily message that they were trying to get out. One day was the economy, one day was international security. They had a whole day, and that was the whole message they were concentrating on. And you didn't hear a whole lot, on the reporting side of the news cycle, reinforcing that message. It's sort of like they were, I guess the press ignores it, of course.
Well, it's not so much suppression as what they were filling it with was what Trump was tweeting and sending out on his social media network. I mean, when he should be talking about the same time he should be talking about Abbey Gate, for example, and talking about immigration in every other sentence that he states. What did he do? He released a new, what are those Bitcoin? I can't even think of the correct name.
Cryptocurrencies.
It was one of these little crypto, virtual art things that's legitimately just a piece of software that's not worth anything.
Yeah, the non-fungible tokens, NFTs.
That's it, non-fungible token. So he releases a non-fungible token this week. I'm just going to say this. Just what the hell's that got to do with winning the presidential race? What does
I
gold
liked when
Hennessy
he was
have to
down
do?
at the border with all of these people that, the Jocelyn, the 12-year-old that was raped and killed. I thought being at the border was a good optic. Well,
absolutely.
How do we win this? Because
how you win this is the media will cover what's sensational. And I remember a very angry editorial board meeting 19 years ago, right after I came back from one of my trips to Iraq, and I was explaining the things that were systematically happening, and the reporters were and I got rather agitated with these reporters, and I finally said, "You won't print any of this." And this guy literally looks me in the eye, big pussy, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that on the radio, but he just said, okay. he said, you can bleep that out if you want to, but he said, honestly, Congressman, people are more interested in car bombings than school openings. And, this level of cynicism that's conveyed there, but they have a business and they want to sell copy, and what sells copy is something that's going to, they're going to sell things that draw viewership. Think of what's happened in news reporting in the last 30 years. We've gone from relatively objective bias reporting, there's bias in all reporting, to now angertainment on the principal cable channels in the evening. And it's not really reporting, it's a lot of emotional bloviating. So they can do an event at the border. I remember when we did this in President Bush's campaign in 2004, we did this as well as we could in a terrible political environment in 2008. When the McCain campaign had their talking points, as long as they didn't disagree in principle with something that we were working on, let's say in my campaign or others, we would also reinforce those campaigns in media. So the biggest bully pulpit in the world are the presidential nominees. And you can amplify that down the chain, but unfortunately, look at what's happened in these critical times. The first thing you get these folks on the Freedom Caucus side come out and say, well, Harris is a DEI candidate. Okay, that's fine. You may even be able to make a logical case for that in concept. But again, who's the target? What's our military objective here? It's to win an election. Therefore, I must receive the votes of the people who might find that rather offensive. This doesn't mean you become a milquetoast and bland and not candid. I was always candid with my constituents. I just didn't want to be mean and pick on people. And this airborne ranger was bullied and beat up a lot as a kid, and I hate bullies. I mean, I'll just be honest with you. That activity repulses me, and it adds absolutely no value. And I've heard a lot of people, after I became a ranger, in terms of that would come after me or my family that way. But if I look at how to win this race, all the president has to do is turn off the stupid and focus on the actual issues that will move that demographic. Because that's what Harris is doing.
Who has his ear? Because you've laid it all out. And I watched 4 days of torture, and there was not a damn policy there. And and now after talking to you, Walt sounds even worse than we thought. And plus, I keep hearing. I mean, there's people coming out saying he's a Manchurian candidate because he's flown to China so much.
Yeah,
I don't buy that. I don't buy that. I don't buy that. I think he's a very left-leaning Minnesota Farm Labor Party Democrat who doesn't do math. He's never had a private sector job. He's always, been in. No, this is not against being a teacher or anything, but He's
Right.
accepted at face value, and I saw this in the Obamacare debate and other things when we were on the Hill, just accepted the talking points at face value, just like the green energy talking points at face value that don't actually look at the physics and chemistry that's involved. And Donald Trump has repeatedly, when he's had advisors, and I think this is the biggest lesson in a number of people who have passed through the first Trump White House, is he will not take criticism. And it's not like we're coming in and say, hey, you're a big dumb guy. That's not what these folks are saying. They're saying, here are courses of action to fulfill your intent. If you want to fulfill your intent, this is what you've got to do. He has to be able to turn on that real estate charm to that demographic if he wants to win this race. And he's repeatedly said he won't do that. He said in national interviews, I think about a week ago, he's going to go with his gut. And I'll tell you, as an aviator, something y'all can appreciate too, you learn to trust the instruments. I wouldn't be talking to you today.
Right, exactly.
If I trusted my feelings, I'd
married
be
to a
dead
fighter
along with 12 other
pilot.
people.
That's exactly right. When you think you're in a spiral, you better be looking at them instruments and believing what they're telling you.
So
Yeah, I mean, I had one of my buddies killed flying into a mountainside, like that. And it's just the point is that we have to come back to what the facts are. Is it unrecoverable now? No. If this trend continues, I think it will be unrecoverable by the second week of October.
Well,
there's enough runway.
now.
There's enough runway to land this ship in a good way. But
we've got to land it in a good way. And Thursday she's going to be on with Dana Bash now with her. I'm calling him her little lap dog because Timmy, because she can't go on an interview without him. And it's going to be all taped and cut and all perfect and not live. And once again, it's the fairy tale that's scripted. How do we deal with that?
Script our own fairy tale, which we're not doing. I mean, the reason that Tim Waltz is going on with her is he's just the big happy lug redneck, good old boy coach person. And the objective of him being on the ticket, although I think Shapiro would have been a much stronger candidate, but Josh has his own ambitions and basically said no. The real reason that he's there is not for winning country boys or blue collar boys from Pittsburgh that like to shoot stuff like I did growing up. The reason that he is there is to be that comforting, sort of big, lovable lug of a guy presence sitting next to the presidential candidate for those suburban women who are going to decide this election by probably under 200,000 votes in 9 states.
Okay.
And we're not doing anything comparable. I first met Chris LaCivita on related to a campaign with Rob Portman when he was helping Rob on a race years ago. Chris is a highly competent technical campaign person. Susie is a highly competent technical campaign person. Trump won't stay on message, so what does he do? He's brought back the guy that he fired in 2016, who's really a very strange dude, Corey Lewandowski, to have some kind of a role in the campaign, and that's all you're adding is more complexity and likely more chaos unless he can get the president on a message. And see, that's the thing, is how we counter it is our own narrative. And if they're doing their fluffy narrative, you've got to have a fluffy Trump narrative. And there's nothing more powerful than the candidate themselves looking into the camera and speaking with sincerity to that special thing, that feeling of hope, very realistically, that that we can overcome this. I know when I entered politics, I made my announcement 2 weeks after 9/11, and I was in a big group of a big Republican women's group. People were shook up. They were scared. We were all still angry, over this. I had friends from the Army in the building who were wounded when that attack happened. I mean, it was like much of the country was touched by this. And I stood up there intending to give this kind of generic speech, and it turned into, we are Americans. We have faced hard times. Let's come together. We will work together. We will build together. And as I told my 5-year-old daughter, we will get the bad men who did this, but let's focus on the future and maintaining a future for them. And that is a powerful, resonating message in every human being. And I'm paraphrasing what I said back then, but the reality is people want hope. They want to cling to something. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They don't want to function 24 hours a day on anger and grievance. And frankly, it was a cognitive dissonance when you're a billionaire born to the manor and you're complaining about how unfair everybody is to you all the time. It doesn't wash. It's like he had Dr. Phil. He should have been talking about women's issues in a sensitive, the same tone of voice that he used in the Dr. Phil was perfect. But he shouldn't have been talking about how if Jesus had been counting the votes in California, he would have won California. That is completely fallacious. And if he actually believes that, then there's a bigger problem. But that's the kind of uncontrolled messaging and disciplined messaging. Remember, I'm talking to you as a member of Congress because my celebrity opponent with a thin skin completely melted down in a public setting standing next to me.
Well, you better call Susie Wiles. I'm requesting you step up.
I've been on the Trump blacklist for 8 years.
Okay, well, you need to break in off the blacklist because Susie Wiles needs to hear this. And I know people that have her cell number, so I'm going to, after this show, I'm going to try to share it. I'm
going to tell you something. Susie Wiles does know this. She's a brilliant campaign person. If Ron DeSantis was the nominee, this election would be over. I'm just telling you.
Well, that's who I wanted because the Trump derangement syndrome is real. I know people that are normal, and they hated him from when I was working the campaign in 2015-16, and they still hate him, and I think they hate him more. And so he was not the right pick, and so. And then he picks J.D. Vance, which to me I wasn't following, but I will say I've liked all of his sound bites. He's been impressive when he's in front of the press and he's engaging. So what are your thoughts on J.D.?
He's a smart guy. He's not unlike President Trump or Kamala Harris or Tim Walz. They don't have a strong moral foundation of deep beliefs that animate them in terms of political policies. A lot of it is economically unsound that's being touted by both campaigns right now. George Will wrote a great column on that this week and 2 weeks ago. But the economic realities of unsustainable policies, nobody's talking about those things. But the way that again, coming back to who your real swing demographic is, it's not going to be gun owners who are going to vote for hardline Second Amendment people aren't voting for, are not going to vote in these battlegrounds for her.
And I've heard that. I've heard that it's a waste of his time doing these rallies because we know all these people are going to vote. And who was our guest, John, we had on the other day that said he needs to be doing little venues and places trying to convert these people.
But again, look at what J.D. Vance has said. He's on tape, and you can't run over. It's like I've told my kids for many years, God will forgive you of your sins as far as the East is from the West, but they're on the internet forever. And and one of the realities is the way that J.D. Vance has talked about abortion. I can tell you, my wife and one of my daughters, we lost a baby midterm. Little boy, and there are a lot of women who are my wife is extremely pro-life. Some of the commentary that J.D. Vance has made is very offensive, especially in that demographic that traditionally would lean Republican. And, not to get into all the politics of Roe v. Wade, this is not a discussion about abortion, by the way. This is a discussion about talking in terms of what people care about. And so the challenge is no different than the point of main effort if we were planning a military operation and where we're going to apply the mass of our firepower and the mass of our force to break through and pursue and exploit the enemy to accomplish our Army Air Force objective here. The whole focus of that is on what it takes to seize that objective or to fulfill that commander's intent. And what the intent should be is that message that pulls those suburban women in. We're already starting to lose them in the Atlanta suburbs right now. I was in a meeting up in Pennsylvania 2 days ago, where we were talking about actually Trump may be stabilizing a little bit in Pennsylvania, but there's real fear of the folks that I was meeting with that he's on his way to losing Georgia again, even with the registration advantage. And look what he did in Georgia. Two things. When you're supposed to be being sensitive, he was pulling black males, young African Americans, people looking for opportunity, had kind of forgiven the past offenses, were moving toward him. And look what he did 3 weeks ago. He began the week by going to the National Black Journalists Association, which is a hugely wonderful opportunity to come across with humility and kindness. And just if there's a sharp question, just let it go by. Don't be a jerk. Reporters who can be prickly, just be friendly. Disarm them with your kindness. And the reality was, he called into question when Kamala Harris became black. When did she become black? Well, when you're sitting there with a few hundred African American journalists, does that really speak to the audience in a way that you can win the crowd? No. And then the very next Saturday, he's in Georgia and goes over the top attacking Governor Kemp.
Big mistake, I thought. Big mistake.
Absolutely. And so what I'm saying is, people have told Trump this, and he's refusing to change. And I think that's the thing that breaks my heart in all of this. We all have served our country. Many of the people listening to this broadcast have served our country in a variety of ways, not just in the military, but giving of themselves and their communities to make it better. We have a hope. We want to govern based on reality. We want to govern based on truth, on real math and economics, to be able to, to recapture, if possible, a future for our kids. And the solution to it is pretty straightforward. But you have to have the dude in the cockpit who's holding the thrusters and the stick to fly the aircraft in such a way that it's going to do that, and he's not doing that. And that's why I think that it's like not unlike what we talked about back at the beginning of the year, before Biden showed the incompetence that many of us have seen for many years on that national stage at the debate on June 27th. I think what we're going to end up with is 51 to 53 in the Senate, Republican, thank God, because that stops all this crazy stuff that they're talking about. And had Trump not interfered in Georgia in 2020 and accepted his loss and said, I'll be back in 24, he'd be cruising to re-election right now. And we would have never seen the investment or the Inflation Reduction Act. We would have never seen this crazy legislation that was moved by the Democrats when they controlled both chambers in the White House, because we would have controlled the Senate. There are second and third order effects of significance. He needs to have humility. He needs to focus only on the task at hand. He needs to not be angry and show a side of himself, like he was trying to sell this target demographic, these target voters, what it is they want to buy within reason. And he could win the election.
I thought he did well with Elon, because you did see a different kind of Trump.
Right.
Yes, but you do, but here's another thing. What demographic hates Elon Musk more than any other? Suburban women who are educated.
Damn it, those suburban educated women. I think I'm one of those, but I'm like, maybe.
No. This is not a monolithic category. There's lots of different tints and flavors of perspective on views. But when I'm saying this is, if you want to sell something to somebody, you've got to listen to them so you understand what it is they want to buy.
I'm going to try to buy Susie Wells' cell number off of eBay, and I'm going to try to get her this show, because I agree with you. He's got to come off kind and nice.
He's not.
I can also say things that a person on a campaign staff can't say, because I'm not on the payroll.
Well, and I know this because many years ago, when I went up for the inauguration when Trump won, everybody was ticked off at Senator Rubio because he wouldn't support Tillerson for, Secretary of State. And
Secretary of State, yeah.
The entire weekend, I'm running around D.C., or the entire inauguration for a few days. You're meeting people from across the country. You're meeting people from Canada. And what were they when you would tell them that you were from Florida? they were all pissed off and told me about Rubio and how dare him and blah, blah, blah. And he ended up on my flight, and I've done a lot of Rubio things. I also was his campaign chair before I jumped to Trump. And I actually told him, I said, I've worked for generals, and I just wanted to tell you this. The good, the bad, and the ugly, that the entire world that I met for 4 days was pissed off at you because you wouldn't support Tillerson. And his eyes got really big, and he thanked me. But I don't know if his staff had told him that. And, I felt he needed to know. And this has been a conversation that he needs to know. Trump needs to know.
The thing
Trump
I'm concerned with, though, is...
This.
Right, but who's he surrounding himself? As you pointed out, he brought back Corey Lewandowski. He brought back Brad Parscale. And what was their theme? Their push is let Trump be Trump. That's their advice, and that's the wrong advice.
Well, Trump can be Trump after he wins it. But right now we need to win it because...
when James Baker said let Reagan be Reagan, and one of my mentors was his deputy national security advisor, class of 69 West Point graduate, who thought the world of the president. And the thing that he said, Reagan is unfairly, and the media will do this to Republican elected officials in spades, is make you look like, try to say that you're dumb or stupid or uninformed, whatever. I've certainly heard my share of that in my life. And we served our country so people can say dumb things. It's okay. But the more important aspect of this is he told me, working closely with Reagan was always magnanimous. He was always kind, with little exception. He was a consummate deal maker who could actually get a deal done. And Donald talks about it, but what H.R. McMaster writes about in his book, I happen to know firsthand some of that stuff is spot on. And, we're dealing with a persona. The mechanics of winning are not that hard, but the choice that becomes when we went in the military, I'm sure you saw, folks, I certainly did. I had my semi-rebellious moments when I was young, but if you want to fly the aircraft, if you want to earn the Ranger tab, if you want to get through basic training past the senior drill sergeant, you got to conform to the standard. There's a standard of decorum and bearing. And the one thing that Reagan was able to do in withering circumstances, especially in the first 6 years of his presidency, was to maintain that magnanimity, that even-keeled nature, that likability. There were people on the left that went absolutely bat crazy about him, and there were people on the far right that said he wouldn't do enough. But the bigger reality was he was very strong with the center of the country, and was able to make generational impact on that. And if you look at what Donald Trump's had the opportunity to do, I don't know that he's going to be able to build that coalition. And because he's not listening to political professionals, to colleagues that want him to succeed, the people in the House and Senate that want him to succeed.
Well, he has to succeed,
and
I think our
But what he does,
lost.
though, is he pushes away the people that tell him things that he does not want to hear. And so I think that when a leader hits that point,
well, then he's going to lose, I can't handle that concept for our nation and my future grandchildren, and I don't know, it's just too much.
I think that, first of all, as the three of us all believe in a higher purpose to this life, that we're not here by accident, that there is purpose in our existence. And at the same time, there's also accountability in our existence. And there's always hope up until there's no life left in the lungs if we stay focused. I have great hope for this country. We've gone through very, very tough periods in our history, far worse than this. And we can unite around common purpose. I believe that what it may take is, sadly, something catastrophic happening that unites, that shakes people out of their respective fever dreams of, looking at things through filters that aren't necessarily applicable to reality. And it's at the same time, but if Donald Trump will not bend to that kind of a message, I remember one time I said something impertinent, and early in my political time, and I remember my staff member pulling me aside. We're all new to. I'm new to the game. This person had been on many races, and he pulls me aside and said, man, I love you. If you ever, I'll paraphrase this, screw up like that again, I will never work for you. And and I was like, okay, tell me what. But no, and I mean, my first reaction would be, oh, you're fired. You're mean to me. I can't take that. Well, you can't be mean to other people and not be willing to take constructive criticism. And I think that's really the issue. So, for example, again, this is firsthand knowledge of people who were there after the 2020 debate, when he basically ruined his public persona versus Joe Biden, and that's where he lost the election, an interim between the two debates when 20 million early votes were cast. She was leaving the venue in his limo, and his principal staff was there. I about rolled over I was just in disbelief when I heard this. He said, "Pretty good tonight, huh?" And a couple of staffers were quiet, but some of the ones that he listened to were like, "Oh yeah, it was great, sir. Great, you did great." No, he stepped on the old crank, so to speak. And I think that the reality is that is the messaging that matters more than anything else. And so there's no other way to say it. And like I said, is you've got to focus on the thing that matters, on the thing that's going to force your opponent into a vulnerable position, to put them out into the open. And the way that Harris and Walz and their staffs are doing this is they're making them look nice, calm, friendly.
Well, on that note,
nice, fuzzy,
we're going to have you
code.
back. We got to see how this debate goes, and we've got the interview this week too, Congressman. And so I have to have you back on, and I will finish reading all of the chapters you sent me, and they are riveting. You are such an excellent writer. But anyways, we're gonna, and somehow I know people, and I'm gonna try to get this interview to the Trump staff. And we've been talking with Congressman Geoff Davis, and he's managing partner of Republic Consulting, and you were former Kentucky congressman, you're Army Ranger, you're the total stud, and you've got a lot to say, and we need to win this. So it's always a pleasure.
We need, and I'm going to tell you, there are a lot of Republican elected officials who've gone to the mat for him in public, who off the set will tell you exactly the same thing. They won't say it, in a media environment. I'm not sharing anything that's not common thought out there.
Right. No, that's why I love having you on. I love having you on, and always a pleasure, Congressman. And we'll be chatting for sure. And I thank you for coming on Veronica Live.
Hey, thanks for having me, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, you've been listening to Veronica Live with Congressman Geoff Davis. Thanks.